And we're live. Good evening, everybody. We'll just wait for everyone to trickle in. Hi, Peter.
I find these live things bizarre because we can see each other, but we can't see anyone else.
No, but I can. I can't. Put them on. We can put them on.
All right.
Guys, you can mute yourself and turn your cameras off if you want, but let's... Mr. Chris Stanton, is that the Chris Stanton that I've known for a long time? Or is
Hi, Mel. Of course it is.
Mate, that's a pleasure.
How are you, chick?
I'm good, thanks. How are you? Long time.
It's good. I feel a bit unglamorous. Like you look really amazing on camera, and me
It's
sat
all
like,
a facade.
post doing up my house with like scummy clothes on. So
It's a complete facade. This level downwards is hard craft.
So what fluffy slippers you got on?
You don't even want to know what joggers I've got on.
Yeah.
Have you
Hi.
had COVID or not? You haven't had COVID, have you?
Me?
Yeah.
Can you listen to me?
Hi. Oh.
Can you see me? No, probably not.
It's all happening. Right, everybody now, if everyone's welcome to put the videos on because we always feel a bit weird when it's just us two, but no pressure. Everybody is able to talk, but obviously feel free to mute yourselves if you want. I've just gone ahead then and made us one big happy community. We are expecting a few others, but just in the interest of everyone's time, because I appreciate it's early evening for everyone, we may as well kick in.
Mm-hmm.
First things first. Hello, everyone. I'm Mel Spooner. I'd like to introduce my co-founder, Dr. Col Robertson.
Hello, everyone.
Thanks for dialing in, guys. We really appreciate everybody taking the time, and hopefully we can help everybody a little bit. Just to frame up the call and to begin, I'll just run through a tiny bit of housekeeping. We have had some questions in advance of tonight's session, so we're going to use those to help to structure the session, and I'll explain that a little bit more in a minute, so that we are able to help you guys, but in the interest that we don't completely go off piece too much. If you've got any questions as we're going through, if you want to drop them into the Q&A chat box, Col and I will try and tackle them as we go along if we can. If there's anything that goes unanswered, then we'll pick it up offline afterwards. Quick intro beyond our names, I guess, really. For those that haven't had much of a look at any of the bits that I've posted on Facebook, CAWS is an education company. We both have been, between us, we've been in the fitness and sports sector for sort of nigh on 40 years. CAWS as an education company is currently best known for the work that we're doing in COVID-19 rehabilitation. It's important to state for you guys, I think, that you need to know that we're not complete rogues on this topic. We're recognised by UK Active, Europe Active, and we are an accredited organisation. Tonight's call has come about because we connected with Peter Hutchinson. Thank you, Peter, for bringing us all together in one of the long COVID Facebook groups. I reached out to Peter when I heard his story to offer our help. Between Col and I and our team, we're leading a bit of a charge, or the charge at the moment, with government and healthcare to provide localised support for individuals affected by COVID and long COVID via local fitness facilities, sports facilities and coaches who have been trained and certified by us to be able to deliver COVID rehab. Just by way of extra assurance, we also sit on the steering panel as part of the UK's Advanced Clinical Practice collaboration with Health Education England, where the priority of that group is on upskilling clinical practitioners and fitness and sports coaches in rehabilitation. So this is very much the world that we operate in, day out. Hopefully.
Sorry, Mel, can I just jump in for a sec there?
Yeah.
I just want to highlight that last bit you were talking about then. That was actually why I approached you, because I realised that if you guys are telling people what might be the wrong thing, and you're not necessarily hearing other people's voices, it could perpetuate out into the industry. So I thought, oh, that looks like a pinch point that is maybe worth intercepting. And when I actually Googled around, I didn't see anybody else out there doing anything. So that was another reason why I contacted you.
Thank you, mate, and thank you for trusting in us in that way. To provide a bit of background, I hope you guys have had a chance to see the video on YouTube which shares the story of Jan, who had COVID back in March 2020, in and out of hospital throughout 2020, almost had a stroke, almost had the onset of COPD. She's now almost completely out of long COVID, having worked with one of our coaches for a couple of months. So that's just a real 10-minute video that gives you an indication into the kind of work that we do. And I also shared in the Facebook group, and these are links that I can reshare after today, a little bit of a video about Col as our in-house clinical, academic and science expert, rather than us eat into too much time on today's call, which is about all you guys. There's a little bit of information in there about Col's background so that you understand what authority he has to discuss the matter. Our priority as an organisation is to connect as much as possible those who need help with their COVID-19 and long COVID recovery with a coach who is certified to provide help. So if at the end of today's session you would like to know how you can work with a coach nearest to you, I'll drop everyone an email after this session and you can just shout me back if you do. That said, that's not necessarily going to be everybody's first choice. So regardless of that, what we aim to do tonight is provide as much information as we can within this hour to help you to get some easy wins and maybe get rid of some of those myths that are driving you all nuts at the moment. I noticed as well, we've actually got a couple of our coaches on the call as well, guys. So thank you for jumping on. Before I frame up the session then with some of the questions that have come through, Col, is there anything else that you want to add?
No, there's already a couple of comments and questions come in, Mel. So I think people are keen to just get stuck into the meat of it. So let's go along in.
Okay, so we've had a couple of questions come in, but they're all broadly similar. But I'm just going to read you a couple of the stories, Col, because I wouldn't be surprised if this essentially mirrors everybody's situation and will allow you to introduce the key themes that we always try to address first. So Debbie's story, she asked, when do you know it's safe to try running again? Do you recommend waiting for all your long COVID symptoms to completely subside, or should you try running a little if you still have some minor heart palpitations or other symptoms, for example? I have asked my GP and I didn't get a definitive answer. All they said is, your body will tell you. Similarly, Molly, I'm finding my heart rate has settled a lot over the last 10 months, and resting it's about 45 to 50 BPM. And when I walk around the house, I generally can keep it under 100 BPM. But I find it hard to do so out walking. It varies between about 95 and 130 walking on the flat. She's been trying to keep her heart rate under 60% of max. Should she be doing this less? Should she be doing this more? And then Molly goes in to describe that obviously this is a stark contrast to what her fitness levels and her heart rate levels were like previously, which I think is a nice segue, Col, for you to begin to kind of unpack likely the very similar scenarios that everyone's been experiencing.
Yeah, and this really is where there is commonality. This is the ground that commonality is found, because as people are probably aware, definitely the people on this call, there's a real widespread of what people are experiencing. So we've got this term which is long COVID or long haulers, but that captures so many different things on different terms. But we can strip this back and we can just look at some really good solid principles about how we can start to go forward. So your heart rate, I'm sure everyone knows this, is a clear indicator with regards to the levels of physiological stress and even pathophysiological stress that your body is under. So we know that this is a really good indicator to tell us how we're responding and how we're coping with something. And people with a bit of an exercise background have probably got more experience of acknowledging that and monitoring it and having an idea of where their heart rate is at, given a certain set of demands, walking, jogging, running, doing a HIIT session, EMOT, whatever it is. So they're carrying into this now, that's this kind of preloaded notion of what I should do when I'm fit. This is how my heart responds. So the first thing to recognize in that instance is to take a bit of the pressure off yourself. And I guess as well, burst the bubble a little bit. Right now, you're not fit, and don't worry about fitness right now. Okay, right now, your body is working hard to fend off the tail end of what it's had to deal with. Okay, so recognize that your body is really trying to heal. And the reason why those metabolic responses are up and the reason why your heart rate is up a little bit is because the body's working hard to do that. It's on your side. It's trying to heal things. And so when we engage in exercise or activity that maybe put some level of catabolic stress on, stress that's sufficient to break down any kind of muscle tissue, bring about increased muscle activation and even nervous activation, the heart's going to respond to that because it's kind of saying, listen, I'm already working on this for you. And now you're piling that on top, right? How are we going to manage with this? Because it's trying to oxygenate that system and make sure that it can cope. So where the GP, to give the GP some slack here, I understand where the GP is coming from. It's like, your body will let you know, listen to your body. The problem is, and this is based on experience as much as what the research tells us, is we've got so in tune with not listening to our body, but looking at data, and I'm a huge fan of wearable tech, but we've started to miss out the middle part and go, right, what does that say? To the extent someone's Garmin watch will say, that was a tough session, don't train for 2 days. And they go, okay, rather than go, well, how do I actually feel? And why was that session tough? So we really started to connect these two and miss out the middle part. So this then goes into the notion of, first of all, identifying if our heart rate is up because it's having to cope with more, because it's working away on something, then everything's relative to this new position. So imagine, if you will, if prior to COVID-19, prior to the virus, your resting heart rate was 60 beats per minute, a very, very standard resting heart rate. And now your resting heart rate is, let's say, 90 beats per minute. That's just you sat down in a chair. So we've got a difference of 30 beats per minute. That gives us an indication of how much harder our heart is working currently to metabolically deal with mopping up the tail end of what we've encountered. So we have to factor that in. So the numbers, the range has been altered now. So whereas our exercise heart rate might have been 140, so we're going 60 to 140, the difference being 80. Now we have to recognize, well, we've compressed the range. That's what we've done. We've limited the range. We no longer have as many gears in the system. We have to recognize that from the start. It doesn't mean we have to be scared of our heart rate going a little bit higher. Okay. Where I do encourage caution and people to listen or watch their body is if they are starting to go really towards that upper end with low level tasks. If in the example you've given, someone is saying that when they're out walking, they're around about 130 beats per minute. Now that's an increased load. But to me, I'd work with that. I still think that's working with your fatigue. You're not in the upper category, depending on what that is relative to the individual. And what I would suggest that person does is turn that into a low level interval session. So I would encourage them to walk along. In fact, one of our coaches were working with someone and I encouraged this and they had great success with it. Walk along. When our heart rate gets up to that 130, okay, pause, stop, and allow the heart rate to come down by at least 10%. So we want to see a reduction of 13 beats. So we're going to be back in the 117, in the 100 teens, and then we'll go again. And just nice and steady, go again. So kind of treat it as a little bit of an interval session if you want to, and you've got time to do it. I'm going to let it fall by 20%. I'm going to pause, take a breather. If you've got a bit of a route planned out and there's a park bench or something, pause, take a breather, allow for a bit more of a measured, and then go again. The important thing is not to work against it. And people have asked me what I mean by this. So working with it is recognizing that cardiovascularly, aerobically, I'm under more stress. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to recognize that there's a range there that I can still function at, be in control. I'm not working my absolute max upper limit, and I'm going to just prolong that time a little bit and even allow times for it to fall and back up again. Where people work against fatigue and this is a question that came in right from the start, is where they go, no, I know what I should be doing. You know, I should be doing 10 reps for 5 sets at this weight, and I should be running this fast over that distance. And regardless of how their body is responding and their heart rate responding, is they're trying to push to hit those metrics because they go, that's how fit I should be. That's working against it. That's really where you're running the risk of bringing about such a level of exercise stress that you're actually making the whole system vulnerable. So that's what you don't do. You work with it. Then that comes back to the question, when should I start to try and run? I'd say that once you've got to the point, especially if you've been a runner, if you get to the point where you can walk steadily, constantly, you know, moderately, under control, you know, heart rate's up, breathing rate's up, but you're under control, you can manage it. There's no concern that, you know, you have to stop or it's beyond what you can contain. And you can do that for 15 to 20 minutes on 3 consecutive days. And there's no knock on. So it doesn't exasperate your fatigue. You don't feel any more acutely tired. Then I'd say it's time to start thinking about run walk. But that might be more walk than it is run to begin with. But it might be where we just start to turn the gears over and use the same principle. Run a little bit. When we see our heart rate go up, pause or dramatically reduce down to an easy walk, letting the heart rate come back down, recovery on the go. Age-old endurance principle, as old as the hills. We know it works really well. And then go again. And just be modest from the start. Forget what's behind you. You know, forget about what you used to be able to do and start to focus on what you intend to be able to do. And treat today as the foundation, the starting point, and work with what you've got. Because the beauty of this, and what's really good, is that compared to somebody in a non-previously viral condition, you're going to get so many more gains more quickly. You know, previously it's kind of building a base in a non-viral condition, building a base and starting to put together those ramparts of fitness. Well, this way we're going to be facilitating restoration and recovery and then blending into fitness. So what we'll see is those acute changes, which will be about our general health and wellness and the system being able to cope better. And then that will seamlessly blend in to working towards fitness outcomes by nature of just managing that sustainable intensity. And if anything, as we encourage with the coaches, be the pace limiting step. Slow is the new fast. Always go out with the intention that you know you can achieve the session. You're not out there to fail. It's not that type of recovery. It's not that type of session. You are out there to achieve. So you should go right to begin with. It's a 10-minute walk at this pace and achieve it and build off success and start to positively bring about adaptation to that cardiovascular, cardio aerobic system.
Paul, I've been fielding questions while you've been talking, and knowing how we normally deliver sessions with the coaches, I'm going to come at you with them in a particular order. So Chris has asked first, what do you anticipate resting heart rate to increase by to be concerned?
Resting heart rate. That's a very good question. So there's a certain amount of this that if the person previously, I mean, generally people who are into the fitness and that might know this, they'd be able to say what their resting heart rate was, particularly endurance people, because it's a bit of a bragging right. And I say that with all affection. It is, you know,
He is an endurance athlete, yeah, so you're allowed to.
Endurance athletes brag about how low their heart rate, and you know, it's quite an endearing thing. So they may know what it is. The rest of the population who don't typically track it, they normally fall in within that category of, on average, 60 to 100 beats per minute. It's like the average resting heart rate for a person. The guidelines I work to, which have been kind of pretty much set in stone, you see like a global consensus on this, which is that if somebody's resting heart rate is 15 to 20% outside of that range, then that's significant for us to say, okay, you have to recognize that you are under greater physiological burden. There's a greater physiological load. And from that point of view, we should really be looking at being able to manage activities of daily life with plenty of rest in between what we need to do, and looking about tiny things. You know, I apologize, people, but, you know, because Mel and I talked to lots of groups. There was a lady that we spoke to where we were talking about just encouraging her to walk to the bottom of the garden, take a rest, and walk back into the house. It might sound ludicrous, but it's really powerful stuff when we're working that much beyond what we call a more typical or normal, for want of a better word, rest and heart rate. If the person previously was into the fitness and can say to you, look, my rest and heart rate used to be 45 beats per minute, and now my rest and heart rate is 80. Now you might go, well, that's nearly double. That's nearly double your rest and heart rate. However, the sensitivity of heart rate doesn't work as crudely as that. So even though in literal terms it's double, it doesn't actually mean that the system is working twice as hard. And some people might misconstrue that. They are still within what we would call a normative range. But as I said a moment ago, everything's shifted up. We've lost the range. So if their max heart rate was previously 170 and their resting heart rate was 45, then we've lost 125 beats per minute, haven't we? You know, because now we're up at like 80. So we've lost a fair proportion of that range. That's what we need to be considerate of. Okay, we need to go, okay, then we're going to divide the range. Now, I don't think he's on, but there was one of our coaches that we spent a lot of time on this with one of the clients they had. And rather than working as a percentage of maximum, we worked as a percentage of that new range. I didn't invent this. This is a lock, stock staple of endurance physiology. So we divided the new range up into zones. So when we wanted someone to work largely aerobically, you know, looking at like aerobic metabolic response, we worked at 50%, 45 to 50% of that new range. And then as they progress through, we work higher intensities of that range. And the difference that's made to their client, I mean, that was someone who was just hitting up against the glass ceiling all the time, tried to do some fitness, and it was knocking them out for 6 or 7 days. And now they've had 4 weeks back-to-back consistent progress. And I would encourage that for people who've been previously fit. Work percentages out by dividing the new range. And what you'll see over time is we'll elicit this response. Rest and heart rate will start to come back down. Your range will open up. And remember, the best thing, the best feedback you can get, or the best sensation you can feel on your road to recovery is when a session is really, really easy that you thought was going to be more demanding. Great, we've reached another milestone.
Okay, to bring it back a couple of steps, and guys, on our YouTube video as well, just for reference, there is a video on there which talks about the reality of what happens to the system when you do contract COVID-19. But Col, you know, guys, I appreciate that you've probably read a ton of stuff, seen a ton of stuff, but just to break it down in the simplest terms but with real talk, can we just talk through the guys, like what damage COVID-19 has created to the system? And then to addresses kind of the beginnings of one of Peter's questions and Oliver's questions in the group. What's the risk of trying to go too hard too soon? And how might that be leading to the onset of what we know to be long COVID?
Okay. Right. So first of all, if there are any clinicians on, we apologize for using the word damage. We know the clinicians are very averse to the word damage, but I've tried every other word and it doesn't quite fit the mark, because literally what the virus does is bring about trauma, damage to the alveoli of the lung. Because what you got to bear in mind is that the virus, there's lots of things the virus does, but when the virus gets to the point where it's sat upon the cell and it sends in the code, working on that DNA, mRNA factor to replicate itself, that's the first thing it does. It works away uncannily, undetected, and then says go and sets about destruction of the cell. At which point the immune system recognizes this trauma, goes in all guns a-blazing, and in an attempt to take out the virus, takes out healthy cells as well. So you get a double wave of devastation. And this cellular trauma, this cellular damage isn't just, ethereal. It's not just magical mist. It's happening on lung tissue, on the alveoli. It's happening to nervous tissue. We know that it's happening to cardiac tissue in some instances. It's happening to areas of the vital organs. It's happening to the oxygen within the hemoglobin. So as much as we don't like to use the term damage because of what that can provoke, that's literally what's happening. But I think that's useful to us when we turn that on its head and we go, okay, my body has undergone some damage. The same way that if I had a sprain or a strain, or if I had a fracture, you go, right then, I need to protect that because that's experienced some trauma, and that's going to take time. For instance, if it was a muscle strain, complete soft tissue repair, despite what people might think, takes like 6 to 9 months for complete soft tissue repair. So if we start to apply that process to ourselves, a fracture takes 9 to 12 months. So we say, okay, then this stuff needs to be restored before it starts to get really massively loaded up again, because it needs to be needs new life breathed back into it. It needs to be fixed. It needs to be repaired. And these are the things that we get, and this is what we see happening. And it's difficult to assess because it won't show up on an X-ray. You need, like any kind of lung issue, would have to be revealed by CT scan. And there are other reasons why, because we know that it affects the interstitial muscle. We know that it affects neurological tissue. So there's probably a limit to how much feedback you're likely to get based on a medical assessment. So I think it's best to go off how your symptoms feel, because what we do see across the board is people will say, well, they've got a bit of peripheral neuropathy. So we know there's been a bit of nerve tissue. That's why you lose your sense of smell and taste, because of neurological changes. When people start to have an issue with breathing, feel they need to breathe more, they can't breathe deeply enough, and this has an impact on heart rate. Okay, it's fair to assume some of what's happened has taken place at the lung, at the alveoli level. So recognizing that, I say to people, we'll treat that the same way as if you'd sprained your ankle, fractured your leg, your arm. Nurse it. Go steadily. Start to reintegrate progressively based off how it feels and what you do. You wouldn't, a week after a fracture, go and attempt 100-meter sprints or a HIIT session. You just wouldn't do that. So think of this in the same terms. Think of like, okay, the cast is off, don't need the cast anymore. That acute level of healing's taken place. Now let's start to gradually build up, and you would base that off a kind of, pain response, wouldn't you? As to how that felt. This notion, again, like the GP has advised some people, this notion of listening to our body. And this is the reality of what we need to be encouraging, and what we need to be advocating for people to do, is to really consider that what has to happen first of all is the healing phase and the restorative phase. And then we engage the rehabilitative phase, which is that active period that's going to support that and enhance that outcome. And in a lot of ways will speed that process up. And then we can get into the progressive phase. So there's kind of a lot with regards to how the mechanism is underlying what people are experiencing and what they're seeing. Now, symptoms are a funny thing, and this is where syndromes come in. And I'd say right now, it wouldn't surprise me at all. And Mel, you were in conversation we had yesterday with a lady from the NIHR. It's very likely that long COVID is going to become termed as a syndrome, because there's a collection of symptoms that typify what long COVID is starting to be. And all the syndrome means is that there's a collection of symptoms that are atypical of a situation. And when you have enough of them, someone will go, right, you have that syndrome. And I think we're starting to head towards that kind of outcome with regards to long COVID. And because of that, symptom management is typically the way we go about addressing a syndrome. So I would encourage people to, kind of recognize that unless they go all out, unless they try and work really intensely or really long exposure period of time, they're not likely to cause any harm, but they're quite likely to cause themselves some discomfort. And they're also quite likely to cause themselves some exaggerated fatigue and acute tiredness. And that's going to have a knock-on effect, because that means that that day and potentially the day or two later, they're going to have increased muscle soreness, prevailing levels of tiredness and fatigue. That's going to prevent them from doing any kind of physical activity or exercise that day. So they're putting themselves back. You're losing time. You're kind of pushing yourself back beyond the start line every time you do that. And again, that's why slow and steady wins this race. It really is about going nice and progressively, and every single session should be set out so that you know you can do it. It's beneath what you think you can do. I promise you, I've spent 25 years recovering people from everything, from trauma with regards to limb loss, cancer, diabetes, you name it. I've spent 25 years helping people to recover and rehabilitate, all the way through to just sports performance, the easy stuff, recovery. The way to get it right, the way to be successful, is to really, from the outset, go, I know I can do that, so that's what I'll do. And that might be 2 minutes worth of physical activity on day one. But remember, two minutes of physical activity day one, if that's 3 minutes day two, well, you've already increased by 50%. If that's 4 minutes on day three, well, within 3 days, you've increased your load by 100%. Think about it in those terms, be really steady and incremental. And I promise you, by taking this slow and steady route out, you will soon get to the point where you look back and realize just how much distance you've covered and how better, because we're starting to create a tolerance within that cardiovascular, that cardio aerobic system, to enable it to do what's coming on the horizon, the more progressive, the increased load kind of things. And again, because of the types of neuropathy and neurological interference, a session one day might just be about movement accuracy. I can't emphasize that enough. Assume nothing. Go through some simple movements at home, if need be, one at a time. A step two lunge, a freestanding squat in the kitchen where you can support yourself. Start to check your own movement accuracy. And if you're a coach on here, guys, and you're working with people, and particularly if you've looked at any of our content, we're very big on monitoring and assessment and getting those objective guidelines. But we can do this ourselves. Practice movements. If we're going to go and try and jog, it'd be great to know if we could do 10 lunges. It's simple things like this that we can just start to build up. And I promise you, by the end of week one, you will see a measurable improvement. By the end of week two, you will feel differently and build from there. Where people are experiencing setbacks is where they start to go, okay, this is good, I'm going to push. And it's the push phase that sets them back.
A few things to follow on what you just said. Or the fracture analogy that Col shared there always makes sense. And the one that always hits home with me the most when we talk about people is, if you've broken your leg, you wouldn't go for a run. And essentially, if you've experienced the worst type of symptoms, metaphorically, that's kind of what's happening. Now, a couple of the guys have asked a couple of questions in relation. One, let me just scroll back 2 tickles. Hang on. Anna said she's not a big fan of wearable tech, so kind of judging when's good and when's not, how far's too far and how far's not far enough, she's struggling with. Hang on, bear with me. And then Clarissa was talking about the fact that she'll feel good on a day, so she'll hop on, say, indoor bike, whatever, and do a little bit, and then a couple of days after, she's ruined again. So in response to both those things, I was just going to mention, guys, what you guys are saying there is completely akin to every other individual that we speak to with COVID. And for example, Jan, who we mentioned before, Jan couldn't walk to the end of a garden. Great. She was struggling to action emails on a laptop. Back at as recently as November, she could only walk about a quarter of a mile. And Jan previously was doing CrossFit like 4 times a week. Livid, clearly, wants to get back to training. Like, mentally, it's a battle to stop herself wanting to exercise. She started working with one of our coaches, and now she's comfortably who's on, Chris, shout out. Now she's comfortably walking between 3 and 4 miles without feeling any negative repercussions a day or 2 after. But there's a definitive threshold between the 3 and 4 miles where she knows that she's pushed a little too far. And actually, Chris, Jan and I were just catching up the other day about Jan's story. And Jan was saying she was scheduled to go for a walk on, say it's Tuesday, and she's supposed to have a scheduled rest on the Wednesday. The weather forecast said the weather was going to be shite, so she wanted to get a walk in. So she did a second walk on the Wednesday instead of resting, and it threw her off for a couple of days. Mm-hmm. So that rigidity, again, just to reiterate Col's point, in terms of managing and as someone who trains, 6 days a week, I relate, but the ability to resist and schedule in that rest time the difference is profound to the quick road, as Col said. But the hardest bit, I think, for a lot of people, and it would be the same for me, without the support of another individual, is understanding where your line is. Because the risk you're taking when you drop over the line, as you guys know, is this negative repercussion. Now, when we talk about the role of the coaches that we work with, I want to point out that that's not a sales pitch. We don't commercially benefit at all by connecting you guys with a coach who's certified in this. So if you are finding that you're really struggling to find that line and help someone to unpack your symptoms, unpack all your heart rate data, and the after effects you're experiencing after exercise, that's where our guys are chiming in to sort of literally, or well, not literally, clearly, social restrictions, but literally accompany you alongside you to set where that ceiling is, and then help you sort of push under the ceiling so you never push too far and set yourself back. And that's why we're seeing such progress with the guys that we're working with. Col, does that make sense?
It does, yeah. But that scenario is the classic scenario where someone says, "I feel good, so today I'll make the most of feeling good, and I'll go for it." And that's the classic scenario that sets people back. It's far better to take the attitude of, "I feel good, so today's going to be easy," because that 10-minute, 15-minute walk, that 20-minute jog walk that I'm going to do, whatever it is, it's going to be easy because I feel great today. I'm not going to go, right then, now's the opportunity to push, because I promise you, I've been studying fatigue, been researching fatigue for a long, long time. And more importantly, I'm really fortunate to be in research collaborative groups with some incredible minds who've even been researching it longer than me, would you believe? And you cannot work against fatigue. You have to work with it. So on those days that you feel great, brilliant. That means today's session, as planned, beneath what is that you think is a test, is going to be easy, and it's going to take less out of you. But people don't see that. They see a green light and they go. And then that second part, which is what we call delayed onset. So we can get this with DOMs, delayed onset of muscle soreness. You can get second day, third day onset. And typically what happens in that is someone goes, done it, I've got away with it, I feel all right today, and then boom. And the reason being, or part of the reason for that, is that your body works off certain types of oscillations within time periods, and particularly with regards to its inflammatory markers and what can happen to it. And we, in the acute terms, we might get this like false positive. We might get this rush of endorphins and enkephalins, and we might have that kind of whole feel-good factor in the wake of that session. We've stirred a lot of stuff up, and there's been a nice adrenaline kick in there, and we go, okay, and that acute tiredness might mean that we sleep a bit better that night. But then comes the point when all these things start to settle, the body's still in its restorative phase, but now it's got a whole ton of these inflammatory markers up and about, and some tissue that's wanting to be repaired, and then we get this whoomp, this, because metabolically we're working harder and we get this spike, and then we're fatigued and we're more tired and we feel debilitated and we get muscle soreness. I promise you, you can go through your recovery without experiencing that. I promise you can. That's a check I'm prepared to sign. You've just got to, from the start, take that moderate approach and go, right, I'm going to do a little bit every day. A little bit often wins this race. And I'm just going to gradually nudge that upper limit little by little, so that when I look back, I can see it's changed this much. But day by day, it's only changing that much.
Just quickly, I just want to say thank you as well to Kath, who's just shared her story with us in the chat and then said that we've spoken more sense than she's heard in months. Bless you, Kath. Thank you. And then Ian, who's recovered now, which is awesome, is just sent his appreciation. Said this is great stuff. So great news. I'm glad, obviously, that this is going some way to helping you guys, definitely. One thing I was going to jump on there, Col, what you just said, is a guess as well that obviously you guys are keen athletes, but what we're talking about isn't just isolated to fitness and activity. And a lot of things we hear about kind of in the first session with a lot of the individuals that the guys work with is this big offload with relation to Ian's comment about the mental side of it, especially, if you guys are parents or you've got high demand jobs. It's not just the fitness side that you're trying to resume normal levels of activity with. It's your normal daily life. And so in some ways, dependent on, I guess, how severe the after effects of COVID have been, there's this notion of the limiting pace applies to all areas of our life, really. And again, Chris, shout out since you're on. Chris has been working with one of his clients who was under a little bit of pressure to go back to work by their employer. Clearly she's worried about, job security, so she's keen to get back to work. So as part of the rehab plan, they worked together for her to simulate a work-life environment at home where they could establish how she could operate as best and perform as best as maybe she normally would in a work environment, but to take natural, maybe sometimes covert breaks in amongst that routine to allow herself some time to kind of decompress between the working day. And similarly, if people look, we've all got demanding home lives, and Jesus, homeschooling doesn't help with that. But again, it's about the awareness of that and factoring in those additional stresses around us, which is a lot to manage. So I think a large, again, related to some of those thank yous in the chat, and thanks guys, a large part of what we try to do is encourage the coaches that we work with, but also us as a whole community, to acknowledge the mental implications of that and the fact that it is shit for you guys and it is a real thing. But as much as possible, we'll try and kind of pull you out of that bit with guidance and support, rather than allow it to kind of, manifest and create more stress for you all, really. Peter asked, I can't find it. If I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but this is obviously more Col's department anyway. If ME has been degraded exercise, recent changes in guidance in the UK, has this changed your opinion?
So that was a mistype.
that makes it feel better.
For years, they've said that people with ME should have graded exercise, and the ME community pushes back from this because they're like, no, it makes you more sick. And they've recently changed the guidance to be like, oh no, it's got to be rest. But my experience of this whole last 12 months is it's a bit of a whirlpool. The more you rest, the more unfit you get, and the easier you thus then degrade. And it's like you're constantly going down the ladder. So everything then becomes, all of a sudden walking to the shop becomes difficult, which shouldn't. And so I was wondering what your opinion on, because what you've been talking about, it sounds like graded exercise to me. I like the idea of it. It totally made sense to me. But people who aren't from an athletic background, I don't think understand. And I was just wondering if your opinion's changed with that guidance change.
It's interesting on that, and I have a very strong opinion on this, which might not be shared by many or appreciated.
Thought you might.
it might be appreciated by even less. I think that the pushback against graded exercise in ME is because a lot of what people with ME experienced was really bad instruction and guidance on graded exercise. I think that what they experienced en masse, because what you got to bear in mind, there was individual stories and accounts and even documented observations where it worked really, really well. Hence why there's been this renewed, constantly renewed drive with regards to the application of graded exercise for those populations. However, across the board, and this is often the case when we try and apply principles broadly, a lot of people felt that there was a lack of individual consideration and that there was a template of graded exercise that they had to meet. And whereas in some instances that met where they began from, the rate of that graded exercise almost felt like it was set in stone and they had to keep up with it. But you know what the problem with that is, Peter, and this comes into another forum that I'm a part of at the moment, is that we have a postcode lottery in the UK with regards to the quality of rehabilitation that you receive if you've engaged with your local hospital, primary care, NHS. A part of that's down to funding. A huge part of that is down to a drought on certain types of skill sets. I personally, if you look across the literature, when we look at where graded exercise is applied well, where the individual is at the heart of what determines the rate of progress, we see alleviation of symptoms, we see enhanced quality of life, we see all the typical benefits that we would expect exercise and increased physical activity to have on the individual. I think that's what we need to tighten up the application of the principles, and it needs to be, I hate the term patient-centered, it needs to be person-centered. I mean, we can't just say, well, you have ME, so it's this, because it expresses and it's presented in such different ways. So that would be my take on it. And I understand how those concerns have translated over into this COVID-19 situation with regards to long COVID, because again, as I said, it's heading towards being identified as a syndrome, which means it's a collection of symptoms. And so, what we're going to experience there is that huge amount of variance. And that again comes right back to why we mobilized straight away to go, let's try and prepare professionals so that they can deal with this really intelligently and well and keep the individual at the center of this. Because our concern was that a generic guideline document would come out and people would be generally get an inconsistency in care and probably push too hard and have another negative experience of exercise. The human body, human fact, physiological fact, life fact, number one, in stone, the human body heals better on the move. Fact. Whatever it is. Early mobilization in ITU, the earlier we start pre-habilitation, rehabilitation, the better the outcomes are. When it comes to incidences of non-communicable disease, when we look at anything we see, humans heal better on the move. What we've got to do is kind of block out a lot of the noise, particularly a lot of the noise around exercise and a lot of the cliches, go hard or go home, all this nonsense about training hard and it's got to be this and it's got to be tough, and that's all got to be pushed so far into the background. That's just for people who like to do that. That's their hobby. People have all kinds of crazy hobbies. That's for them. When we look at the application of exercise in this instance, it has to be about really optimizing restoration and health. That's the key outcomes to enhance recovery. And then hopefully, I'll be honest with you, what I'm hoping this brings about for individuals across the board is a new relationship with exercise and fitness that's on their terms, and that they realize that it's purely about the preventative aspect and the increase in quality of life and how it makes them more resilient and less susceptible to other things. That I'm really hoping, that sounds a bit evangelistic, but that's what I'm hoping for. And I'm not taking my eye off the ball with regards to ME. And fortunately, the advanced clinical practice group that I'm in with Health Education England, when we look at the rehabilitation programs and strategies that we're considering, ME is firmly in there. It's in there right alongside cancer, type 2 diabetes, stroke, COPD, and quite rightly so, because it's an area that needs to be better serviced.
Chris put his hand up to ask a question. First of all, pause. Peter, did that answer your question?
It did, and it reinforced kind of what I was thinking. That the reason I set up the athlete group is because I could see in the main COVID group there was definitely some professional grief wallowers, as I like to call them, with the cat pictures and my life's terrible. And I was cutting in on that. They were saying, "Oh, I've got this, and now I've got COVID. My life's this," and you can still see them in the group. And I thought, "Oh, I need something else. I could spiral down." So the group's really useful. There's some really good stuff in there. But I was aware that something else needed to exist, and I'm glad I set up the group and we've got 400 people in now. So yeah, I'm quite happy to
sucking people out of that. I agree. The community's good, but the sentiment needs to be more positive and recovery-centered.
So that's what I wanted to create, and obviously we've banned cat pictures.
Yeah.
I can't stand cats. Sorry if that puts anybody off, by the way.
We're dog fans over it.
Dogs are allowed, no cats.
Mr. Chris Ward, go on ahead.
Can you hear me, first of all?
Yes, Chris.
Oh, good. I just wanted to follow up on something you said, Mel, and hello, everybody else. When I've been working with, actually everybody that I've been working with over the past 3 months or so, which is in total probably 10, 11 long COVID sufferers, even from those who've got it relatively mild and have just needed a bit of extra guidance of a couple of weeks, through 2-3 weeks, and then they're out and they're clear, they're self-managing, right the way back to some who are clearly on a very long journey. Something that some of the folk listening tonight may not quite appreciate is the cumulative effect of various stimuli that are in their life that just sort of layer on to this fatigue. It's not just about physical exercise and physical activity. I'll give you a couple of examples that just hopefully bring it home. Jan, actually, who you may have seen the video about, we all know very well, she couldn't figure out early on in our discussions why she was particularly wiped out for a couple of days when we spoke. And what we do every time when she has the sort of the downward episode, if you like, is that we look back on the previous 1, 2, 3 days, however long it might need, so we can understand if there's a new trigger. And it didn't take very long to figure out that she hadn't done anything out of the ordinary physically, but what she had done is she'd driven from her home to her parents' house, which is about a 45-minute round trip. It was chucking it with rain. It was sort of that funny light between sort of, light and dark, that dusky type of light. And it was that collective stimulus that she hadn't been subjected to for a number of weeks that triggered another sort of downward turn. So whether you are busy in a job, whether you have kids homeschooling, whether you even have a positive emotional day. I've got another lady who I speak to on a weekly basis who recently had a birthday, and it was a very positive, very, very, uplifting day, but it wiped her out completely because it was different. And there was a stimulus, there was an emotional load to the day. And even that took her, because her tolerance is extremely low, it took her 2 days to get over the fact that she had a slice of cake with the kids. Yeah. But it was the emotional attachment and the emotional load that brought with it. So what I'm trying to say is there's a physical, there's an emotional, there's a mental, there's a social perhaps load to all of your stimuli on a daily basis that will layer onto your collective fatigue. So don't ignore those other factors when you're looking back on a day, or as importantly, looking at a day or 2 day, 3 day stretch and go, right, should I do my exercise now because I've got a 3-hour Zoom meeting this afternoon, which I find incredibly dull and taxing, and then just make sensible decisions based on cumulative load across a day or even 2 or 3 day period. And that's something to factor in when you're managing your lives through your diaries. Does that make sense?
It does, Chris, and that comes down to something that, funnily enough, I've been dealing more and more with over the past few weeks, is the difference between distress and eustress. And that comes down to perception, and it comes down to personality type. So, you know, for instance, a experience or an occasion that might make someone thrive can make another person wilt. So exercise is a good example. I've always been really fortunate that it takes zero motivation. You know, people will say to me, how do you stay motivated? Exercise takes zero motivation. I just get so much from it. It's my coping strategy in life. So for me, there's no kind of, I've got to go and do it, which I know is shared by a significant number of people. I've never had that. I can't wait to get out there. It's the priority for me. I want that time to do it. By the same gesture, as you just referred to, the prospect of, I mean, I've got 3 kids and a wife, the prospect that they put on like a birthday party for me and be the center of attention, that would stress me. I would hate that. I would hate that. Whereas other people thrive in that environment. They love the notion of that kind of thing. So it's really important that you know where you're at in this and what the cost is. And if exercise for you, and there's nothing wrong with this, if exercise for you is an investment of time and effort because of what it brings, but the actual doing is tough and you have to motivate yourself, well, you've got to recognize that comes then with an increased amount of psychological arousal and a little bit more anxiety and a little bit more stress. You've got to be able to look at the situation and how it fits you and your personality. And also what we're seeing across the board, and Mel and I know someone who's really keeping a close track on this, is that lockdown, repeated lockdown, things that are happening socially, things that are on the news, is changing a lot of this for people. The sand is moving under their feet, and the kind of thoughts and feelings they had about certain situations prior to March 2020 are different now. There's been such a heightened state of alertness around COVID, around political things, around socioeconomic things, around schooling of our children, around infection, vaccine trials, people are under a lot of stress, perceived stress. And that has an impact. You're dead right, Chris. That has a huge impact on what they're tolerating with on a day-to-day basis. It's just adding more and more on top. And these are the things, when a coach is working with an individual, and the most valuable investment to begin with is the initial consultation. It's not doing exercise or saying, right, let's do this. It's that conversation that opens up and starts to find out where a person's at, how they feel, and where they'd like to be, what their aspiration. That, that's not a lip service. That's not like a token gesture. That is the crux of where the success stems from. Because when we understand that, and this, Peter, goes directly into that ME conversation, and believe me, it ties into cardiac rehab and everything else. Once we've got that about the person, we can start to work with them, and we can start to put physical activity and exercise in place for them and not at them. The biggest failing of exercise rehabilitation across the globe is when it's done at people or done to people and not for people. And that, again, is a difference in our approach. As someone, I've been very fortunate to work and develop some really successful endurance athletes. I've been really fortunate to inform the Olympic, help to develop the Olympic pathway for the development of endurance athletes. And where that success has always stemmed from has been about that notion of individuality and recognizing that we're not creating molds or templates for a person to be a certain way, but we're looking at the stock and the talent on the terms of the person as it comes through, and figuring out what's the best way to optimize their circumstances. And I believe that every single person undergoing their rehabilitation from whatever deserves the exact same due care and diligence that we apply to that, because that's how we can guarantee success.
Agreed. To finish,
Mel, have we got some questions? Because I've just noticed there's a.
I've been going through them as you've been talking. Don't worry. They're the ones we've been going through.
And you got the ones from the chat, because there's Q&A and chat on my screen.
Yeah, I'm covered. I've got you covered.
The ones from Esther.
Oh no! Stand by. Okay, hold that thought for a second. I know Carl has a research meeting shortly. If you've got time to stay on, Carl, we could dial into those Q&As, or we could answer those in the Facebook group. What do you want to do?
It might be just because I'm just looked at the time. I've got 5 minutes, but there's a lot in here. Let me just have a quick look here. Training and advancing training. What are your thoughts on screening prior to beginning return to training? Nicola, hopefully we've hit a bit on that, but screening is vital. I'm just going to pick a few out, Mel, if that's all right. Yeah, screening is vital. 100%. We need to understand the individual, and we need to take a baseline assessment. Some of our coaches now, in fact, it was brought to our attention by one of the coaches who works up here, is not only testing his clients who've had COVID, but he's testing all of his clients with the monitoring method that we've put in place, so that if they get it, there's a staple to measure back to as to where they've been previously. But it all starts from that evaluation. That's what we do in advanced performance, in high performance settings, and it's exactly what we should do with regards to our rehabilitation. Let me have a look at this one here from Molly. Heart rate decreases when I get on the turbo, 90, and then drops to 65 for the 5-inch pedal compared to walking, which takes. So that's very common, and that's a postural, Molly, that's a postural phenomenon, which we actually see quite a bit, to be honest with you. But that actually happens in normative populations as well. So we've gone from being weight bearing, and there's a postural shift in your position. So we do. It's not uncommon to see a change in the heart rate response. Compared to walking, which takes 130, does this mean the turbo is good training tool for me? It does, Molly. It does. What I like about the turbo, or an exercise bike for anyone else who doesn't use that kind of bit of kit, it's non-weight bearing, easy to control. At the point you need to stop, you literally just stop, pause. You're not vulnerable. You're not anywhere. There's no return need. And it's a lower physical and systemic level of stress. So I actually think that that's a good thing for you to work through on that, Molly. So yeah, I would encourage that. Jared, would also like to understand your thoughts on autophagy. Right, that's huge, Jared. Wow, where do we start on that? In what context are you talking about? Senescent cells? Are you talking about the breakdown and replenishment of kind of cellular turnover and transfer? I mean, obviously, it's gonna be a factor with regards to the notion that we're overcoming a virus and the levels of trauma that a virus begins. So it's clearly got its part within this, within the pathology of it. So yeah, do you want to drop another line in there with regards to the context of that, Jared?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, great. No, it was more kind of generally, along with this great group that Pete's created on Facebook. There's another group, it's a Recover from a Long COVID group, and there's a guy called Tom Bunker who's basically suggested that through autophagy, through water fasting once every week, and taking various supplements, it will help increase or help recovery through this process. Have you heard anything on your side about autophagy and how this is working?
Yeah, so I mean, let's be careful. I don't know who this person is, so I'm not going to start, because whenever you get two academics who are together, you'll get a conflict of opinion. the evidence with regards to fasting on it is really good, but I would encourage you to recognize that to date, and this is actually an area I do keep up to date with, there is no benefit beyond, there's no perceivable benefit beyond the 16-hour window. So some people are doing 24 hours, 48 hours, and there's that data is really ambiguous. But we do see a positive impact when we look at the 16-hour. And I always encourage people to go, right, if you're going to do a 16-hour fast, take advantage of the nighttime sleep phase, stop eating at 1800 hours, in the evening. Then, yeah, you can sip water because it's non-metabolic, so it's passive on the system. And then don't have anything, tea, coffee, anything, until 1000 hours the following morning, and then you invoke that 16-hour fast window, and actually doing that 2 to 3 times a week. And some of the best evidence is with regards to particularly people who are younger than 55, I have to say, although we see some benefit in aging populations as well. Some of the best evidence with regards to the impact of intermittent fasting for those types of cycles have been established off that data with regards to that clearing out of the damaged cells, removal and prevention of the senescent cells, and therefore facilitating the recovery and regeneration of the new cell. So yeah, using it to that extent, I don't think there is to be, actually, I'm not aware that a specific EFSA approved supplement is currently on the market with regards to that. And there's a lot of things that are out there that, you just have to kind of keep an open mind. But as far as I'm aware, there is something on the horizon. As some of you may know, I work as a research advisor to a nutrition company. There is stuff on the horizon with regards to its impact, direct impact on senescent cells. But currently, I'm not aware of anything that's available on the market. And also, I'm just confident that the research around that intermittent fasting window of the 16 hours, taking advantage of the nighttime, brings about a positive effect on that, Jared. So I would encourage that. And there's a ton of other benefits with regards to heat shock protein profile and all kinds that can be had from the back of that as well. Hopefully that helps. I want to get back to at least the walk. You mentioned needing no symptoms. Jared, this notion of no symptoms for 3 days after a 15-minute walk, what I mean by symptoms, if you don't feel, if you go for a walk and, it's not that you need to go, right, I feel amazing. That didn't affect me at all, so now I can do the other one. It's a case of, you've got to weigh up, and this really comes down to the individual. Like, what level of impact has doing that done? Has it prevented you from doing other things? Has it had a negative consequence on your normal activities of daily life? Has it meant that you needed to, do less throughout the day? Did it have a negative impact on your sleep? If it's not that, if you just feel a bit acutely tired, but you're okay, then, assess that and move forward. That acute tiredness, as long as it's manageable, isn't that dramatic. What we've got to look for is something that means that we can't engage in the other things. That means our body is taking quite a hit in just trying to create that. And it could just be that, on day one, you exercised at 0900 hours, and then there was a tail end effect of that. And the next day you can feel it. And normally you'd go out at 0900 again, but you're going to go, I'll see how I am this afternoon. And come the afternoon, 1200 hours, 1300 hours, you might go, actually, I feel like I've recovered. Then okay, let's go again. We've just extended the recovery time and we've offset it, and it's non-dramatic. However, if it is quite making quite an impression, quite dramatic, then it's far better to go tomorrow's recovery, and I'll come back at it the day after that. I'll just answer a couple more, Mel. We'll have to pale off a quarter to. How is blood oxygen linked? Mine is normally around 96%. This is to Mark, and drops to 93, 94 if I do anything at all, i.e. walk upstairs. Okay, so you will see the change. This is actually, we teach this to our undergraduates year one with these big Douglas bags, and we look at oxygen transfer and exchange, and a lot of attention has been put through the media with regards to oxygen saturations, quite understandably so. But sometimes you know, a bit of information can be more scary than it is supportive. And actually that 96 dropping to 93, 94 as you go upstairs, this is what we call eliciting a level of acute oxygen deficit. So your body goes into a bit of an oxygen debt because we've increased the demand. That's what, on average, steadies off within about 10 minutes of maintained activity at a certain level. So that's quite a normal response. So unless you're getting real dizziness or acute lightheadedness and nausea off such a small task, I actually wouldn't worry too much about that. That's not a huge drop. And certainly don't let that prevent you from trying to do a steady, within your control, managed walk outside, trying to build up to that 10 minutes. Right. Let's just have a look here. Some support rehab, so further Col and Mel. No worries if you don't have time. My heart rate, you've done that one. Are there any supplements you would recommend to help the mitochondria repair? I mean, as anyone who knows me will know, and I guess we'll wrap up the questions live at this point. But I'm huge on two key areas really when it comes to nutrition and its impact, particularly on cellular restoration. So we're looking at epigenetics. One, you cannot dismiss the influence and significance of making sure there's sufficient omega-3 in your diet. So I would encourage you to look at that in your diet first. Fatty fish, you know, because those marine-based omega-3s, the DHA, have a different role and place to play than the ones that we get, for instance, from flax seeds and chia seeds. And then looking out there, if you're going to get an omega-3, don't get fish oil. Go out and look for something that is bound to a polyphenol. Fish oil on its own is not enough. You need to find a product that is bound to a polyphenol. Making sure that there is sufficient amount of vitamin B12, making sure there is sufficient amount of vitamin C, vitamin D on a daily basis. They're key components with regards to supporting normal immune function. But particularly when we start to look at the interplay between B12, magnesium, and even I'd encourage you towards looking at your beta glucans 1336. These are all things that are going to start to kind of change the gut biome and start to change, epigenetic cellular response. We could go on and on. We could do a whole talk about nutrition, but I think that's a good place to start.
There is a little supplement video as well on our Instagram channel as well, Molly, if you want to have a look at that, which might help a little.
If you could post that in the group, Mel, that'd be great.
Yeah, of course I will.
Yeah, that'd be brilliant.
There's obviously a number of other questions on there, guys, so I'll keep a copy of them. In particular, Rob, who emailed me, I'll make sure that we come back to you on that because I heard you in your email. So I'll make a note of those and we'll either facilitate those through Peter or in the group or something else. As I mentioned to Clarissa, I'll drop everybody a little email after this, so if you want me to connect you to a coach, by all means we will. Obviously in all cases those guys, go on.
Just want to say, just noticed the question, sorry, just come through there. Just want to dead quickly touch on this one. This is from Susanna with regards to emphysema with athletes. Funnily, the reason that's caught my attention, funnily enough, this has become a little bit of a recurring theme with regards to endurance athletes, this notion of emphysema in the wake of their COVID-19. And there's a lot of discussion and debate and work going in around this. It does seem to be a common phenomenon. However, it ties in to information and understanding that's quite well established and held. There's a really powerful paper back in 2002 that looked at the difference between trained versus non-trained in 21 days bed rest, and the changes that we saw with regards to changes of the lung and changes, with regards to dehydrogenase, succinate, and all these kind of factors. And we saw a marked change, one, prevalence of the damage with regards to the emphysema, and then a down regulation of those enzymes and even aerobic tolerance. Everything I've talked about tonight with regards to that real measured, slow, steady approach is the way to manage those circumstances, okay? Because it's a restoration recovery approach first. And the problem that we've seen, and there are hothouses of this, are people going, no, this is an elite athlete, this is what you used to be able to do, so let's keep trying to reach
That's
this?
not what I'm doing. That's not what I'm doing.
So
Don't worry. That's not what I'm doing. I have been sick for 11 and a half months. I got sick in February. I did absolutely nothing until June. I went back to training until June, and I straight realized I could only work 45 minutes once a week instead of 6 days a week, and that's what I did. Nevertheless, by the end of August, I couldn't even water plants, and I couldn't even stand water plants. So I completely crashed and have done nothing until the 31st of December, when I went for a 20-minute run, in which I felt I could run for an hour, but I ran 20 minutes, stopped, and I completely car crashed. And I am a rower. I used to run half marathons, and I have done nothing for 11 and a half months. And right now I'm walking between 3 and 5 kilometers a day, 5 days a week, and that's all I can do. Saturday and Sunday, I clean the house, I do everything else because I can't do anything else. But all I'm doing is just walking.
But I have to say, Susanna, so what you've described previously, though, which is that notion of such a big break and then a 20-minute run, is what we call boom and bust. So we've gone from zero to, it might not seem like it is, and you're a classic example of someone with a previous high level of performance output and therefore expectation.
No, I'm sorry, excuse me. What I mean about not doing anything is that I wasn't doing any training.
That's what I mean. Yeah, that's what I mean.
But I'm still a very physical person. Until August, I plant everything I eat, which means I garden, hardworking. I live in Italy, where I am, and where nobody has ever heard about long COVID, ever. They have no notion, and
that's really surprising.
Well,
Susanna,
so anyway, so it's not like I haven't been doing anything, but I haven't been doing is training. But I do understand what you mean. It's just that I want to know if there is some hope.
Yes, there is.
At this point, everybody, I'll be 57 years old in 6 months. So basically, like I said, there are no doctors here that ever heard about long COVID. So they basically are all looking at me and saying I should be glad that I look fine, I'm thin, and that's it.
So Susanna,
I just want to know if there's some hope.
There is hope. I'm just mindful I need to leave this meeting because I've got a research meeting. But Susanna, there is hope. And I'm going to go back to what I said, is the 100% there is. I'm a bit appalled to hear that people in Italy aren't having a conversation about long COVID yet, but hopefully that will come. And what I'd like you to do is attempt 1/10 of what you think you can do and repeat that every other day, and you will start to move forward. 20 minutes takes you way beyond oxygen deficit to sustainable oxygen transfer, from doing activities in normal life to that stuff. You don't think this because you've got a training background, but physiologically that's a big change in gears. And there definitely is. If you can just back this down, Susanna, I promise you now, what you're describing is not untypical. What you're describing is a problem we have with some of our higher performing athletes, and it's getting them to refocus and change their ideas of what to expect from themselves and just start to do tiny amounts frequently and to build that up. And 100% there's hope.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
That will pick up.
Thank you very much.
Right, folks, I'm going to have to bail.
Thank you.
You go, Col, and because I know you've got to go, and I'll just close up for the guys.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for taking the time. Speak to you all again.
Bye. Thanks, guys, so much for joining, and thanks, Peter, for having us. This video I'll put on our YouTube tonight, So if you do want to refer back to it, if there was stuff that went over your head or you just want it there for reference, it's there. I'll make sure I post the link in the group. And as promised, I'll ping an email to everybody in case you want us to connect you to a coach. In between time, if you haven't already been on the YouTube page, there's quite a few FAQ videos on there. And if you look in the comments under the video, you'll see what questions we've addressed. So there might be some bits in there. Bear in mind that a lot of the stuff that we film is for coaches, but there'll obviously be nuggets that you can take away. And of course, there's similarly, like the supplement video we were talking about before, Molly, there's bits on our Instagram page, which is @CAWS Daily. But otherwise, keep in touch, because hopefully we can help make a difference for everybody. And thanks for everybody's kind comments. I'm really pleased it was useful.
Very useful. Mel, can you hang on for 5 minutes after this is finished? I just want to have a quick chat.
Yeah, of course you can. I can call you on your phone if you want. It's up to you.
Oh, I'll do it on it.
Come on then. Thanks everybody. Stay safe.
Thanks, Mel.
No, thank you. Thanks for all your questions. Chris Stanton, legend. Not seen you for years. That was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, take care, guys.
Awesome, Mel. Speak soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.